Um, Also, there's been concern expressed about making sure that community is at the table with council as decisions are being made. And then when decisions are made, that those decisions, or when the community speaks, that what they say are, what is said is listened to by the council and acted upon and such. And the mental health, public safety policy is one of the issues that popped up as an example of that.
Okay.
Lack of people being at the table or their voices being respected.
No, I think, in the recent millage that was passed by public, or what it was called was public safety and mental health, there was concern, and I know that We Rock, one of the coalitions in town, had a mass meeting that talked about and really challenged some of the local elected leaders, from school board to city councils to Washtenaw County commissioners, to really use those funds for what they were designed to be used for. And one of the concerns was that the city of Ypsilanti had taken the position that they designated funds to like the parks and other areas, and there was some pushback on that. And I just feel that, one, when millages are passed, the citizens vote on what they understand that millage to do. And I think the sheriff laid out a very good case for us in terms of what those dollars were needed for, and citizens responded, overwhelmingly responded. And I think we need to hold our elected officials accountable for that. When you talk about having voices at the table in terms of community members helping in the decision process, that to me means that when people come to give public comment, that they're coming because they have a concern about that issue, or have studied that issue, have some experience or knowledge in that issue, and that city council should be not just listening but honoring that, in the sense that we have to too, as elected officials too have a responsibility to share with citizens their position in terms of, if you have expertise in an area, and I was trying to think of an example of that, but it's both ways. I think that citizens come because they have an interest, a desire, knowledge of that area, so they share with council their concerns. And we can use the International Village as an example. When citizens came to the table and said, we're concerned about this project, we're in some ways fearful of this project, we don't understand it, we don't understand the cost, who's behind it, who's going to benefit from this, the appropriate response to me from council would have been to take in that information and say, okay, maybe we need to slow this process down and say, let's listen to the citizens and see what our next step will be. That if citizens don't understand it, don't know the cost, don't know the benefit, then that's a good moment for us to educate, because we have that level of expertise in that, because we've talked to the developers, but that didn't happen. What did happen was that city council went on and took a vote and decided to proceed with the project until it really fell apart. So I think when you talk about creating space at the table, that means that, one, you're not only listening, but you're honoring people's voices by making sure that you take what they say seriously, and you take what they say and implement it into the result. So that means that if people say to you infrastructure is important, that means that our next budget priority should include infrastructure. So that means you take what people say and honor that. And I think right now we're living in a time that people do want to be heard, because we have endured a lot as citizens. Even in this nation, we've endured a lot. And I think people's voices, because they have knowledge and experience, lived experiences, when I say experience, people have lived experiences that can help inform decisions. And I think that should be a part of the decision-making process for council, that we are elected, and prayerfully I'll be elected, we're elected to sit at that table to represent. And that means that you represent whatever ward or the citizens that you represent, but you listen and take their concerns to the table. And that means that you're speaking on their behalf. So I don't take Ann just as Ann to the table. I take Ann and everyone who's behind me that informs the decisions I make to that table. So I advocate on behalf of those individuals. So when things come up at council, oftentimes, when I worked for the state reps, oftentimes Dave Rutledge would be on the House floor and would call a citizen who he knew, or an agency he knew worked in that area, and would say, listen, we're struggling with this. Can you inform me better as to how this will impact our community? And people are very willing and able to do that. And I think the same thing with city council, that we have to tap into our citizens and get them engaged, in the sense that at the end of the day, it impacts all of them, not just us at the table. And I'll give you an example. When I served on council, we were looking at a streetlight assessment. And my initial thought was, because I talked to the city manager, he said, "Ann, we need this. It's going to give us about $200,000 to $300,000 to really ride through this crisis." And I said, "Oh yeah," I said, "I guess we better do it, you know." And by the time I got home that night, and it was reported in the newspaper that Ann Brown said, you know, she support this street millage. By the time I got home that night, I had probably 9 or 10 messages from citizens in my ward that said, "Ann, I really can't afford this assessment. I'm a senior, I'm on a fixed income." And those are things you have to take into consideration. So I called the city manager the next day and I said, "Listen, I don't believe I'm gonna be able to support this streetlight assessment, and for these reasons. I have seniors that are saying to me that they're on a fixed income and can't do it. I have young people who've just purchased a home and said, you know, we're already stretched, we can't do it. Is there an alternative?" And I posed those questions to him, and he came back to me and said, "Ann," he said, "I get it, I understand it." He said, he said, "It's something I propose," he said, "because we really need the funds, but let me go back, rework the numbers." He actually said, you know, "Let's talk about some alternatives." And had I not listened to the citizens, we would have passed that street light assessment, and you know, people would have been put at a disadvantage. We did end up actually putting that millage on the ballot, and people voted for it. But at the same time, and that's why I'm saying that our decision-making process really has to start with where our citizens are. And that means listening, but honoring that you just don't hear it. One of the things my mom used to say to us is, you know, "Do you hear me?" And, you know, if you say, "Well, yeah," you know, the next question was, "But are you listening?" And that for me is the difference, is that we hear people, but at this stage we need to start listening, and that means you take what they're saying to heart and you process that in your decision making.